Hello and welcome to another episode of Prodigy Search Presents. I'm Mark Rush Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. Today, I'd like to welcome Matt Sawicki, Senior Director of Championships with the USGA. Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Mark, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you've been with the USGA for 10 years, play a huge role in a number of different championships, which we'll talk about, namely the US Women's Open, the US Senior Open, the Senior Women's Open, and of course the US Open. And during the course of the 10 years, your role certainly has evolved and changed, which we'll get into. But prior with the Bruno event team and going back to your days as a caddy in the mid-90s, bring a ton, 20 plus years in the golf industry. And listen, if we have time at the end, maybe we'll hear about the days of caddying. I'm sure there's a good story or two to tell. But why don't we start with the business side? And it's hard to look past this most recent championship in September. What we just experienced, I would argue, I think you would agree, is the most unique US Open at Winged Foot. Let's talk about maybe a number of different things. What was it like with no fans there? And did it feel strange not being on Father's Day weekend? Maybe we start there, and I'm sure I'll come up with others about this past Open.
Yeah, it was definitely different. But at the end of the day, I think from an organizational perspective, it was wildly successful. And I say that because when all of this happened, and March 12th, 13th, March 11th, you pick your day where you want to say was the demarcation point. Mike Davis made it very clear to everyone in our organization that our goal was to hand out the US Open trophy. We were going to hand out the trophy. We're going to conduct a championship. And, we certainly had a worthy champion in Bryson DeChambeau, and we did that. But when you think about the group that we consider to be perhaps our greatest stakeholder, players, I think we were able to do things for the players this year that perhaps we've never done in the past. And some of that was because we felt we had to make up for not having fans. But ultimately, I think we accomplished that. And so, when you get it right for the players, that means two things. One, you get the golf course right. Anybody who watched on TV saw a flawless golf course. And the setup by John Bodenhammer was just terrific. But our player services team, Robbie Zalznick, Jason Gore, who led that effort, if you could be back at the hotel each night, I think we tried to steal elements that we've seen from the NBA bubble, the NHL bubble. We tried to make it as normal as an environment for the players as possible. That included offering dinner from Ruth's Chris every night, courtesy of the USGA, having deliveries from different delivery services available to them, every amenity we could think of that would make the player experience as normal and perhaps better than what they experienced in a normal US Open. I think we hit those marks, and the feedback we received has been really positive. So overall, I think it was a great US Open, despite it being a different one.
I really missed you. You and I met a few weeks ago, and we talked about the Father's Day tradition, right? And that's something that I used to watch the Open with my old man, and that was just so here seeing it not in mid-June. It was certainly awkward, but it was still one heck of a championship. To your point, how did your role change? This is a loaded question, right? How has your role changed, or did it change with all the prior championships you've worked versus this year? And so the things you're asked to focus on, how your bullet points in your resume and your job description are now flip-flop, perhaps. Like, talk about how your role has evolved because of everything going on now.
Well, Mark, just going back to Father's Day for a second, I think you had a lot of people on staff who didn't know what to do on Father's Day because we've never been able to experience it at home with our families. So, from a personal standpoint, there's so many great US Open memories that people have. But mine tend to be personal. I think about my now 3-year-old daughter, the first time she went to a US Open and running up on Father's Day at Shinnecock and just giving me a big hug. And, for all the great experiences you have in working in sports and all the great places you get to go, especially in golf, those family ones truly are the best. So I think that was the different component of today. But, working at an organization like the USGA, I'm so blessed and thankful that our value structure is one that this US Open, more than any other, it took a collaborative effort of everyone, not just to do their normal responsibilities in their job, but really to extend and branch out of that. We had members of our executive committee and members of our executive leadership team walking along as walking scores during the championship. We had members of our equipment standard staff standing on the golf course when they weren't being asked to do club work, spotting golf balls. It was really a collaborative effort, and nobody from our organization, and granted, I've not been at a lot of them. I've been fortunate to spend the majority of my career at the USGA, but whenever you asked someone to help, and it didn't matter the task, they were willing to pitch in. And I think so often at our US Open, where there are so many people and you're dealing with 40,000 fans, and you've got certain people who are dedicated specifically to the media, and they never leave that box. And you've got others who are managing our partner relationships, and they never really step out of that box. So many people joined together and were willing to do whatever it took to get it done. And with the limited numbers that we were asked to have on site, with it being really essential personnel only, the fact that nobody flinched when they were asked to do something, maybe even outside of their comfort zone a little bit, just shows you what a special organization the USGA is, that it hires the caliber of individual that will do anything that it takes. And so I think that's where it was really special, and where roles varied. There weren't the dinners, there weren't entertaining future sites. It wasn't about educating individuals. It was really about doing whatever it took. And so my role, the role of my teammates on site, it sounds cliche, but it was whatever we were asked to do on a daily basis. And that's why it was different, but special in a unique way this year.
So we talk about the idea of, what happens at any PGA Tour event, let alone a major, and what was missing this year, aside from fans, but when you think about the financial impact, right? Ticket sales, hospitality sales, food and beverage, merchandise, the list can go on. But I think most people, even in our industry, I would say I was a little bit naive to this, aren't fully aware of the true financial impact of this year's Open has on the grand scheme of the USGA as a whole, right? Whether it be the various championships or junior golf, whatever is supported by the Open or subsidized, whatever word you want to use, but supported financially by the Open. Can you talk about that support and maybe what the future holds as a result of missed opportunity because of not having fans there this year?
Yeah, Mark, we've made a greater effort this year to really be more transparent about our finances and what the US Open does, not just for our organization, but again, the greater game of golf. And so the USGA generates in the vicinity of $165 million of revenue from the US Open. We put approximately $80 million back into the operations of conducting the championship. In the ballpark of 15 million goes to players, purse, player services. But, the remainder of that $70 million goes to the greater game of golf. And, when you think about that, what that means, that's golf course sustainability. That's our turf grass research programs. And that doesn't just extend to golf courses. That extends to football fields and baseball stadiums and the turf surfaces they're playing in. 25 million to grow the game efforts. We're one of the largest supporters of the First Tee, LPGA, USGA girls golf. There's so many programs that you can name where we're trying to support underserved populations and grow the popularity of the game. And so 75% of our total revenue really comes from the US Open. It subsidizes everything we do, and we're reliant upon that. And so what that means for the future, I think that's something that weighs heavily on our minds every single day, is the US Open has to generate revenue for our organization, not just to survive, but really to thrive and to do the things that we feel as an association we're obligated to do. And so when we look holistically about what the future holds, we know when we go to different sites, certain sites are going to be more fruitful than others. In certain years, we're going to make sacrifices, perhaps operating a smaller US Open with a smaller footprint, because the operations simply don't yield for us to open up our doors to anyone and everyone. And so when you think of the LACCs, the Marions, some of those really special venues that are landlocked, it limits our capabilities. But when you talk about a Pinehurst or an Oakmont, which are great, expansive pieces of property, Pebble Beach, it allows us to do a little bit more. And so I think we look at it from a 5-year perspective, the ebbs and the flows. And so, certainly no one knows what COVID is going to bring in 2021, the lasting impacts in 2022. I think until there's stability with COVID, there's not going to be true consumer confidence in what goes forward. And so I think we're making plans, as every other organization is, how we safeguard ourselves in 2021, maybe even 22, but ultimately how that balances out as you look to 5, 7, 10 years down the road.
Hey, if Marion comes back, please, that's right in my backyard. It'd be incredibly convenient if we can get back to Marion and have fans attend at Marion. Listen, I know we focused a little bit on the U.S. Open throughout the first few questions. What I'm curious about, though, Matt, more broadly, right, is how do you prepare for all the championships, the ones I mentioned at the beginning of our call when I was talking about yourself, right, the women's, the senior, et cetera. I mean, looking at the remainder of this year, but also next year, how do you start to prepare where, again, without, again, pulling the curtain back too much, but what goes into the preparation for what's ahead, what's going to be a busy next golf season, really busy on the men's, women's, and senior side?
I was telling my team in Houston that we're actually going to plan and conduct 2 women's opens by the time we even conduct another men's open championship next year at Torrey Pines. So the calendar is certainly loaded up, but I think we're bullish on what's going to happen over the course of the next year. And so, when you think about executing a women's open championship, we're still locked into what the remainder of 2020 is going to bring us. I don't think that when the clock strikes midnight on January 1, 2021, that all of a sudden everything's going to be normal again. I don't think there's anybody who really thinks it's going to be that way. But when I talked about that optimism, we're talking about amended plans for corporate sales and ticket sales in our 2021 championship environment at the Olympic Club, which is just a phenomenal golf course for the Women's Open, and a place where, quite frankly, we're looking to continue to elevate the Women's Open Championship in that venue. We've got our Senior Open at Omaha Country Club, where Omaha has been a market that conducted one of, if perhaps not our greatest U.S. Senior Open in terms of fan and corporate success. But if you look at Torrey Pines right now, we're on sale to the general public with our tickets. And we've been selling corporate hospitality. And while we hear from some corporations in market and nationally that they just don't have the confidence to commit right now, there are others that, quite frankly, are ready to jump both feet in and want to know what our plans are. And so we're going to plan. I don't think that we're going to be back to 100% normal. It's ultimately what percentage are we going to have that's normal, and what our local champions that help us in market going to tell us about what that community is experiencing, what our local governmental leaders going to allow us to do. There are so many factors that ultimately we're taking this one championship at a time. Dare I say 15 minutes at a time, because I think that's the way everybody's had to operate in 2020. But I think we're going to continue scenario planning as we did with Wingfoot, as we continue to do with our 2020 U.S. Women's Open and Champions Golf Club in Houston. We're going to create various scenarios. We're hoping for the best scenarios, but we're going to be ready for taking whatever is ultimately given to us from a financial standpoint, from a fan standpoint. At the end of the day, we want to make sure our customer journey, our stakeholder journey, whether that's a media member, a corporate client, and certainly players, which I talked about earlier, is an exemplary experience and a number one experience across the board for whatever we're able to offer them at the end of the day.
Now, one of the things, I mean, it seems like the organization's been in the news for a number of different things and changes and growth, and we'll get into the changes part of it. But let's talk about the growth, right, and the expansion with respect to the USGA second headquarters at Pinehurst, North Carolina. The thought process behind that, what you're clearly intimately aware of what's going on there and the reasoning and rationale behind that.
Pinehurst is considered the home of American golf, and for anybody who's visited there, they know that they answer the phones every day by starting off the dialogue with "It's a beautiful day in Pinehurst," and rarely is that statement not true. And so for us to be able to open up a second headquarters there with an equipment testing facility, with an innovation hub, even a museum space as well as offices, is phenomenal. And I think ultimately when we looked at the state of North Carolina, the research triangle between Raleigh-Durham, Cary, and when we talk about innovation, the ways we want to take the game forward, it just seemed like a natural fit. And of course, we've conducted wonderful US Open, US Women's Open championships, as well as a variety of amateur championships in Moore County and the Sandhills region. So we ultimately, when we signed up for 5 US Open championships between now and 2047, it's monumental. It truly makes Pinehurst an anchor site, not just for the US Open, for the USGA as a whole. That doesn't mean we're packing our bags from New Jersey. That's still going to be our main headquarters and our main campus. But there's so much that North Carolina has to offer. And it really was just a wonderful effort between state leaders and our organization in finding a way to make it a mutually beneficial relationship, not every 5 years, not every 7 years, but ultimately for the long term. And we're excited about that.
You know, I think the thing, I use the word change, but in all sincerity, in your testament to this, right, 10 years, you know, a lot of people with the organization, it is stable, right? There are people that have been with the organization for a while, have succeeded, have grown their careers, and have done an exceptional job. Again, as you said, in New Jersey, a very unique part of New Jersey that you and I have chatted about in the past. But the organization has gone through changes over the last few years, and one of them, which I'm curious about, one's upcoming and one happened in the past. And I bring it up because of the notoriety of her current role. But 2 years ago, Sara Hirshland obviously left to join the USOPC and serves as the CEO right now. Talk about the changes, you know, obviously, you know, the things she did exceptionally well at the organization from a commercial perspective, but the changes to the organization since she departed, if you wouldn't mind.
Sara was a dynamic leader. I use that in the past tense, was at the USGA and is at the USOC. And the things she's begun to do there, whether you read through the Sports Business Journal or any blog post, I think she's been a wonderful asset to that organization and jumped in, you know, and really led it with so many changes and really faced with a difficult set of circumstances. So I speak so highly of Sara because I think anybody who worked at the USGA while she was there, Sara was so willing to give of her time to individuals, both personally and professionally. And she served as a mentor to so many and always was willing to give very sage career advice as to how people could be better within the organization. But I think she also valued that the USGA could really build a strong alumni network outside the organization as well. You look at Pete Babaku, who's now the chairman of NBC Sports Group, certainly Sara at the USOC. We've got a long list of leaders who are very influential in the sports community. And so, you know, I think Sara's influence, if there's still a lasting one, really is in some of our executive leadership right now. You think about her hiring of Navin Singh, Craig Annis, both who've ascended to executive leadership roles at our organization. Katie Bynum was a person she'd brought in. Katie's now at the USOC with Sara as well. And so I think Sara really felt, and if you look at her legacy, it was what she was going to leave behind. And while there are so many commercial aspects that you can point to improved processes and ultimately better outcomes for our corporate partners, at the end of the day, I think it's the way in which she's perpetuated the staff and leadership positions and them being able to take her vision and imprint their own in making our organization better overall, holistically going forward. And that's the ultimate mark of someone. It is not necessarily what they do at the organization during their time, but the legacy they leave behind. And I think it's a strong one that she's imprinted on the organization.
What an incredible endorsement. No, that's amazing. You know, and again, I think you would hope to leave that. I would hope to leave that as well, right? And that's the testament. That's a testament to her as a leader. So that's great. I feel like, you know, as somebody who interviews people all day, every day, I shouldn't have buried the lead too much. Perhaps it's the elephant in the room. But Mike Davis, obviously, I could have led with this one. I assume this could have been question number one, but the viewers have to watch the video and listen to the whole interview to get the Mike Davis part of this. So he announced his departure from the USGA in 2021 and the search underway to find his replacement. let's talk about his legacy. I know it's a loaded question, Matt, and I know he's the boss. So let's talk about the legacy, but some of his greatest accomplishments during his tenure at the USGA.
Well, from a personal perspective, I can still remember the first time I met Mike, and it was breakfast inside the clubhouse at Chicago Golf Club during the 2005 Walker Cup. And Mike certainly didn't need to spend any time with a person who was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, but took the time to sit down and have breakfast and talk about his career. And Michael is the one who, along with Tim Flaherty, created a position for me to come back to the USGA. So I have such a great personal affinity for Mike. But in terms of what he's done for our organization, you know, in taking the US Open, in so many ways, he's modernized the US Open, which is, you know, we talked about the revenue that the US Open generates, but from a course setup standpoint, if we don't get course setup right, it's rare that anything else matters from a US Open perspective for our organization. And so Mike really has been ingenious in the way he's been transformative in trying to make it a more fair test for the best players in the world and crowning our national champion. But the other things Mike's led our organization through, we talked about the Pinehurst and developing a second campus there, but you talk about rules modernization. And that's something that does not just impact the professional golfer, that impacts the everyday golfer. And it's tried to simplify the game from a rules standpoint. And we're a governance organization. And if we can make governance simpler, I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't argue against simpler government or governments overall. And so Mike spearheaded that. The Distance Insights project, some of the outcomes that are going to come from that before Mike leaves his tenure as CEO. Changing our bylaws as an organization. That's something that, you know, Mike was the executive director when he started, and ultimately changing to the CEO role. Mike's been influential in that. And then just, you know, the lineup of sites we have for our US Open Championship. And most would probably assume that we truly have the pick of the litter when it comes to going to the best golf courses in America. But when you think of the places we're going to go in the future, we had one of the most monumental US Opens in 2008 with Tiger battling on a fractured leg to beat Rocco Mediate in a playoff. You know, we've got Oakmont, the country club we're going to return to, LA Country Club, Pinehurst. You know, the list is long and distinguished. And to go to those venues, Mike's made that his hallmark of really playing at the best venues in American golf, Pebble Beach on that list. And so there's so many things Mike has done. We talked about leaving a legacy before. Mike has left a phenomenal stamp on the organization. It's going to be tough to see a person who's spent his entire career in the organization, who's a champion for staff, leave the organization. But I think everyone to a person is excited about his future endeavors.
Matt, I didn't tell you I was going to ask you these two questions. So let's start with your best caddying story ever. PG rated best caddying story from back in the day.
PG rated. Well, I lied about my age to become a caddy because it was something I wanted to do. My dad caddied in a Ryder Cup, and my parents made it pretty explicitly clear that to go to college, as much as they wanted to do it, I was going to have to carry a majority of the financial burden. So I started at a young age. And the first time I caddied in a USGA qualifier, I must have been, 13 or 14 years old. And my player was in it. He was from Arkansas. And I read a putt for him on the 15th hole to get us back to even par. And he pointed at me and fist pumped, and we ended up in a playoff, and we ended up as the second alternate. And I was convinced we were going to get in the championship, and he was going to take me with him to Riviera to caddy for him. But in the parking lot, he handed me $100 bill. And at that point, as a 14-year-old carrying clubs in St. Louis, I think I was getting $17 or $18, maybe $20 around. I thought I was paying for a car. I thought I was paying for college. I was the wealthiest man in the world that day when he handed me that $100 bill. And I just never forget that moment. The sensation of helping another person on the golf course, almost getting into a USGA championship. It was a fun day. It's amazing. I still have the memories. I could go around, tell you shot by shot in that round. But it was a fun day and a fruitful day.
Matt, I'm not sure. Are you a good golfer? What's your handicap?
I'm a very average player. I'm a 10 handicap, but I love the game. It's done so much for me from a relationship perspective. Everything I've done in my career, my life, seemed to have a root in golf. The best golf shot, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I was, again, 15. Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, Greg Maddox, that murderer's row of pitchers they had. They used to play golf all the time. Whatever city they were in, they'd play golf. And I remember on a Caddy Monday being able to play at Belle Reve Country Club where I grew up, and they were on a hole adjacent to me. I hit a golf shot to about 2 inches, almost had a hole-in-one on the par 3 third. And I'm convinced that every one of them were watching me when I hit that golf shot. And I turned around and waved to them in the background. I'm sure they remember Matt Sawicki, the stuck it to 2 feet. I'm sure they thought I was a prodigy next to Tiger Woods. But I'm a very average player at best. And I'm fortunate I get to go to the places I get to go to and the people I get to meet along the way.
I'm jealous of your 10 handicap. Well, before I wrap, Matt, I know we talked about it, but maybe just to let the listeners and the viewers know what's upcoming. So December, maybe just a quick little preview of what's ahead.
Sure. So the USGA, we've conducted 3 wonderful championships this year, our women's amateur, our US amateur, of course, the US Open, but we've got the women's Open ahead of us in December. And that's typically played 2 weeks before the US Open. And so we're part of the season ending LPGA calendar. So we're excited about that. But we've got our 4-ball amateur championships coming next spring. We've already begun qualifying for that, but our qualifiers for the US Open, US Women's Open, those are going to gear up in April. And we don't know what the world's going to look like. But again, we're optimistic about that. Being at the Olympic Club in next June, conducting our 76th US Women's Open there. It's a wonderful place where we've hosted a litany of phenomenal championships, Torrey Pines, beyond that with the US Open. We've got our Senior Women's Open at Brooklawn Country Club in Connecticut. The cool part about working at the USGA is you truly are going to the best venues in America. And we've got a great lineup of clubs. We're optimistic about what 2021 is going to bring us. We think we've hosted championships very successfully this year by the metrics, the new metrics we're gauging ourselves on. But when you look at the complete list of metrics next year, which we're hopeful to be judging ourselves on across the board, we're really excited about what 2021 will bring.
That's great. Listen, I really appreciate your time today. It was an absolute pleasure. Obviously, I know you're a busy man. You're not at the home base today. You're already traveling. You're already on the road very safely and in a healthy manner. But thank you for spending time with us and telling your story and the story of the USGA. Continued success, Matt.
Well, Mark, appreciate your friendship and appreciate you having me on.
Of course.